Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This week I have a really good recipe for you all. I grew up loving cinnamon raisin bagels, but I don't always like the sugar spike. And something that you can do when you consume gluten or bread products in order to limit or reduce that sugar spike is to use sourdough starter. Naturally leavened fermented foods are excellent for your gut and also in general healthier than most store-bought commercially yeasted and risen breads. So let's get to this awesome recipe that I specifically designed with you all in mind. Let's get to it.
As with all wonderful bread recipes, we're going to get out our KitchenAid to make our life easier. Start by adding 120 grams of fed sourdough starter to your KitchenAid mixing bowl. If you do not have a KitchenAid, you can do this entirely by hand, but using a KitchenAid makes your life really easy. I like to measure all of my ingredients, as should you, and we're going to start by adding bread flour and all-purpose flour.
I forgot to turn the camera on the right angle. I added about 190 grams of bread flour, typically around 200 is all I had, and then up until 600 grams, it totaled 600 grams of all-purpose flour, so it's like 410, and then a tablespoon of Ceylon cinnamon in addition to our sourdough starter. Let's get on with the rest.
As I stated, don't forget to add a little bit of cinnamon and add half a cup of raisins, ideally soaked overnight, so that when you bake these bagels, they will not crisp up and burn. Additionally, add a tablespoon of vegan butter or olive oil and 275 grams of water. If for some reason this seems too little, start by adding a tablespoon at a time, because a little water goes a long way in a bread recipe, so it's better to add less than more.
I'm not gonna weigh this, but I'm gonna add about 50 grams or fourths cups worth of any sweetener. I like using Truvia. It's a blend of stevia and monk fruit, or erythritol, I think, yeah. So I'm just gonna add that right in. And I know you're not supposed to just dump everything, but it just works easier for me when I'm in a pinch.
Truvia makes things really sweet. You can also use granulated sugar or coconut sugar. Coconut sugar will actually add a beautiful brown color to your bagels, so I encourage you to do this if you'd like. Add 15 grams of salt, or 17 if you like your bagels just a little bit more on the salty side, but 15 is low enough. It's typically 15 to 20 grams of salt per 500 grams of bread flour. Mix in your KitchenAid until it starts to stick off the side of your mixing bowl, as is in this clip. I then pull everything out of the mixing bowl, and by hand on a clean surface, I like to finalize my dough with a quick all-purpose old-fashioned knead. This way I can really gauge the texture of the dough, make sure that it's really nice and taut and the gluten has developed perfectly. If you find that your dough is a little too hard to knead, whack it back in and add a tablespoon or two of water so that it starts to have a higher hydration and it's easier to work with. Bread bagels, though, are really low hydration, so I recommend keeping it at these proportions. I then like to add my dough to a clean mixing bowl and cover with a towel. You will then let the dough rise for 4 hours, or you can let it rise overnight in the refrigerator. As it's rising, you want to add 2 sets of stretch and folds, the first ideally 30 minutes after the initial rise, and the second an hour after or 30 minutes after. Let it ferment once again. In totality, the folds will incorporate this sort of fermentation period, so don't be too hastened if for some reason it wasn't perfect and your dough isn't tripled in size. You just want it to be nice and airy and at minimum doubled in size. If your sourdough starter is not incredibly vibrant, it may take up to 6 hours. Remember, sourdough starter is very finicky, so the beauty of it is that you can allow yourself some time while it rises. Divide your dough into 6 portions using your hands or a bench scraper. A bench scraper is the easiest method to do so, and on your scale, once again, weigh your bagels so that they are equally proportional in grams. If you want bigger bagels, make 4. If you want smaller bagels, make 8. It's completely up to you. Just make sure to divide your mass equally. To shape the bagels, there are many ways of doing this, and you will browse the internet if you'd like and find a million ways and a million different instructions. I like to do it one of two ways. I either form the dough into balls and poke my finger in it. I like to do it the old New York fashion way, which is to roll the dough out into a snake, a medium-sized snake, and connect both edges together, and then once again add pressure and roll them together so that they congeal into one equal circle. This is the way I've seen it done. It works really nicely, but I also find in moments that I feel really lazy, I form the dough into singular spheres and just poke my middle finger or index finger through it and widen that hole. Either works just the same. To a medium-sized baking tray, I like to add a baking mat, which I then grease with spray oil. You can also just use regular olive oil, and I make sure to spread it as perfectly as possible because these bagels will rise and rest in your refrigerator overnight. This is simply to allow them to ferment. It gives you a little bit of a break from the baking time, and then I add more olive oil or spray oil on top and cover them with plastic wrap so they do not stick. This is why you add the oil on top of the bagels. If you don't add it, that plastic wrap will stick to your dough. They look really nice and beautiful. Put them in the fridge where there's enough space and let them hang out while you do other things. The following day, take out your lovely bagels, and before we start even thinking about baking, we want them to come up to room temperature. I like to let my bagels rise and warm up for 4 hours in a sunny place. It is the middle of summer right now if you're watching this video in real time, so 4 hours will be enough. You want to start boiling 8 cups of water, and once it's nice and hot, add a tablespoon of malt syrup. You can also use maple syrup or any kind of liquid sweetener you want, in addition to 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. Malt syrup will give your bagels a really nice brown hue, but you can also use molasses, as this is more commonly found in US grocery stores than is malt syrup. Malt syrup, I recommend going to Amazon for them. Drop in the bagels and boil them for 1 minute on each side using a lovely kitchen spider to flip them once they're ready. I like to time them on my microwave, but you can use your phone. You just don't want to overboil them because then they will get overly chewy. Once the bagels are ready to be set aside after the boiling stage, I like to add a clean kitchen towel to the bottom of a drying rack, a cookie rack, whatever they're called, and let them hang out while I finish boiling the rest of the bagels. I boiled 6 in total according to how many you decide to make, large or small. This will vary according to the size of your bagels. If you do choose to make them a little smaller, they only need 30 to 45 seconds of boiling on each side. Once again, on that same baking tray that has the oil from the previous overnight rise, add all 6 of your bagels, giving them some room in between. They won't rise or spread, so you don't really have to worry if they're kind of close. Top them with high quality olive oil or spray oil just to get that browning on top of the bagel, since we won't be adding an egg wash. This is not traditional baking, this is vegan baking, so oil works just as well. All that cholesterol in eggs typically adds that beautiful brown color. Clean oils can substitute that egg wash just as well. Once you're ready, add your bagels to a preheated oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit and bake your bagels for 25 minutes, making sure to flip the tray halfway to ensure your bagels don't get too brown on one side. You can then bake them to 27 minutes, assessing how brown your bagels are, and also make sure to bake them in the middle of your oven, because if they are too close to the bottom of your bagels will burn. So just be mindful of that because it does happen. Let your bagels cool for 15 minutes on that baking tray, and then with your hands or with a spatula, gently release them and add them to that wire rack so that they will cool completely. You want your bagels to be as cool as possible in order to not ruin that crumb structure, so I recommend you do so. Once the bagels are completely cooled, grab a bread knife and cut right into them. They're the perfect chewy bagels. They don't have sugar, remember, because we use Truvia, so they are on the healthier side, and because they're fermented with sourdough, they're good for your gut. If you guys like this recipe, be sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know what you think in the comments about this recipe if you try it out for yourself. Be sure to tag a friend who loves bagels or a vegan buddy who just needs to indulge themselves every once in a while. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.